Hello. Started just chatting for an hour and a half. Can host for people who want to chat. I don't even have to participate, but I would have to leave if an emergency popped up. Hello. So, if you want to hop in and chat, you are welcome to. I don't even have to participate. It's here. See the live chat and click the link. It's good to share your camera. It's good to share your real name. Those give you extra points in your savings throws. Yeah, so Jacob had a very interesting conversation. He's had quite a few, but I'm not Jacob, just to be clear. I'm Gavin. Um, but I like Jacob. I think he is, speaking a lot of truth, and he's doing a lot of honesty work and trying to help us do sense making. But yeah, if you want to chat about it sometime, that would be cool. Go pick up groceries. I am no expert at Judaism. I like some Jewish people though. Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have the answer. I have a question. Can you pray for non-Jews? I would assume so. The Jews seem to be pretty good people. Well, Jacob would say there's good ones and bad ones, just like in any group. But yeah, there's some good ones, and I imagine they pray for all kinds of people. But that's an educated guess. I am not a Jew. So Hashem is all merciful. It's a good idea. Hashem, I'm aware, is the you know how we refer to the ineffable, our ineffable Creator. And I am currently in Noahide. Noahides, they seem like I think I like Noahides, but the I guess for the Noahides, the one that's most interesting to me is the justice system. Like, how do you do it? Have we done it? How do you provide justice? That's the most interesting Noahide law. Uh, let's see. I like to go to Chabad, um, because I think Jacob has an appreciation for them. Establish courts of law and ensure justice in our world. Like, that's the one that seems really important to me. But uh, yeah, you have seven, and does the order matter? And I'm sure everyone has different opinions. That's the thing about these, like even among Noahide, I bet there could be denominations of Noahide. And can you be a Noahide and have never heard of Torah or Moses or even heard of Noah, right? So you can, yeah, I think every label that you could take on to describe yourself, which includes some people and excludes some people, there's always a question of what does it mean to you? What does that label mean to you? And then is there a label that, like, is your label better than someone else's? Chabad? Yeah, and if I pronounced it wrong at first. Same with Chezi. So the CH is strange for English speakers. Chabad is a good website, but I highly recommend buying the Stone Edition Tanakh. I do not have that. And would I need to know Hebrew? Let's see, Stone Edition Tanakh. Amazon, Hebrew and English edition. Student size, hardcover, $53. Would be interesting. The what is your faith, if it's okay to ask? What is your faith? Um, I believe. I think I believe like in the same God that Jews believe in. I don't, but the big difference between me and a lot of other people is I don't have a holy book. But I try to have a relationship with God. And then I wrestle with God. I try to do that. I try to learn from God, pray and listen. Yeah, I've enjoyed being able to ask questions about Torah, for example, on Jacob's Discord server. Like there was a phrase that I read in English is "Do not suffer a witch to live," because I've had a history in treating plants as sacred, right? And so Jacob gave me his interpretation of that verse, because my initial thought on that verse was that's scary, right? What is a witch? And it sounds like you want to kill them. That was my first impression, but Jacob tried to correct me in my first impression on that. Let's see. And also, would you say religion doesn't matter and that you need to be good to get a good afterlife? Religion does matter. I don't think that there is one religion for all people. And I know that a lot of people end up in very difficult situations so you can be in a situation where it's easier to be good. It's easier for you to be good than someone else, depending on, the situation you were born into. So there is a play between, the free will and determinism and how much you are actually able to do good. So I tend to lean universalist, I would say. And then there's a question of what is the afterlife? Let's see. I feel like you just need to be a good person to get a good afterlife, and that religion doesn't matter. The reason I say it matters is because the religion can help you. Um, it can be a stepping stone to help you get out of a terrible situation. And I think it does serve that purpose. So, in that way, I think it matters. And then, if this whole thing is leading towards something like a, peace on earth, then the religions that exist can play a vital role in going toward that direction, right? So, does it matter? I mean, the question is, I think they can matter, and they probably should since they are so important to so many people. Let's see. I'm highly considering Islam for my future religion. Is it a good idea? Well, on the surface, um, the idea to submit to the will of Allah, that I can get on board with that. But then, what is the will of Allah? That's the big question. And so, if you have people telling you what the will of Allah is, there's a chance you become some kind of obedient worker or an obedient um, slave of some kind. And so you are not actually submitting to the will of Allah. You would be submitting to the will of some human or some spiritual force that is dangerous. So, like, yeah, submit to the will of Allah, but wrestle with it. What is, what is Allah? Like, you have to actually try to find out. Yeah, you have to struggle and wrestle with it. Islam. Islam. What does Islam mean? What it meant, let's see, submission to the will of God. That's what Islam means. Islam has modesty and it emphasizes morality in the highest level. I feel bad because you got me to say that because I know a lot of people disagree. But I'm sure there are very good Muslims who care very much about morality. The modesty part, that's where, I was, you know, what is your hierarchy of values? So we, many of the religious people here would say that God should be at the top. Okay. But is modesty more important than truth? Um, and what about other things like um, humility? Um, so for me, like I struggle because I think honesty is important, but is honesty more important than modesty and humility? So if you value modesty, I can't tell you that you're wrong, but I can say that I value honesty more than modesty, and I would hope that you could see that diversity can be good. We need people who value modesty, and we need people who value honesty. I imagine that smile is related to what you got me to say. Where is Facciareci? He has a job. You can, his cell phone is on the internet. He sells insurance, and I think he wants to become a counselor. So he's busy. And he's interested in getting people to chat on doing this, because doing this kind of chatting. Let's see. And check out EA Dawa. I've been learning from him. And I did once Jacob started interacting with them, I did subscribe. And then let's see. I've probably listened to about, I've only listened to EA Dawa when Jacob was there. Just because I know Jacob, and that's kind of how I work, is I give attention to people who give attention to me. It's kind of how I work. But, I'm sure maybe the folks at EA Dawa would create space for others. Yeah, our attention is the most valuable resource in the world, and there's a question, and it's an important question: is where should we be giving our attention? Who deserves our attention? And I think people on this channel would think that God might be up there, right? But yeah, this is the problem with the world, in my opinion, is we aren't very good at giving our attention, right? And so the point that Jonathan Pageau started saying that as well. It's something we all need to be reminding ourselves of. The question would be I guess each individual probably needs to give their attention to different things depending on their path and where they are on their path. Similarly, groups, religions, and even our species. There's probably some things that deserve more attention than other things. And it's like an important conversation to have. Let's see. I'm about to keep my eye on my other responsibilities. You can go live with him and talk to him. He's cool. So I'm trying to remember his name. So I know that there's two people. Khalil is the one that I found respectful. I think maybe I'm a little biased because Jacob also found him respectful. But yeah, Khalil. But I haven't given my attention there very much. Let's see. Hello, Bazini. Krish, have you read one of the Muslim biographies of Muhammad? One of the Muslim biographies of Muhammad. Where are you going with this question, Bazini? So I know one story of Muhammad, which I found good, or it might be a teaching. And the teaching was that when you are in battle and you're fighting, when your opponent turns around and runs, if you begin chasing after the opponent to cut them down from behind, then you are no longer doing it for God. You're doing it for yourself. You're no longer serving God at that point. And the fact that I'm telling that teaching right now tells you that it stuck with me, and I think it's an important teaching. And yeah, I think that we humans, we can forget God, and that's not good to forget God, to all of a sudden allow our anger. I think that's what the spirit of anger and contention could end up possessing your mind, and you then are doing idolatry. Similarly, there's other spirits. So we can get into a spirit of like arrogance as well. We become too defensive. So be careful of the spirits. And there's something like the Holy Spirit, which is good. Let's see. Yeah, the question is suspicious. And I'm not even I'm not a I don't treat Muhammad with the respect that a Muslim would, um, and I've definitely been disrespectful toward Muhammad. And just you can tell if you respect Muhammad, you can tell that I don't treat him with the same respect. Uh, Old Testament literally says to kill infants. Yeah, there's the part in the Old Testament that I mentioned that impacted me was the do not suffer a witch to live, and then but I think with the kill infants part, there's a there was the enemy. Um, yeah, and like I said, I don't treat any text as being the word of God and sacred. So this kind of there's there's what you read in the text, and then there's well, how do people interpret the text now? And so I guarantee you there are good Jews who are not killing infants. Um, that's my guess is that there are good Jews who do not kill infants, right? Um, and they probably interpret this verse in a certain way. But I'm not going to defend the book that I don't treat as sacred. Bazzini, the Gospels are the story of Jesus for the Christian. The Quran is God's word, but isn't the story of Islam's greatest prophet. It's not a gotcha thing. If you're going to follow Muhammad, then follow him. So I'm sure Bazzini has something about the life of Muhammad that you should not follow, in his opinion, right? So probably you could just say it. What's the thing Muhammad did that you read about that that you disagree with, right? I can point out Jesus and point out things that I disagree with, right? So it's worthy of conversation, especially if I'm the host, because I care about honesty and I don't worry about modesty too much, but I definitely try to keep it respectful. Let's see. Yeah, so we tell ourselves stories, and some stories we treat as sacred. And if you, like I recall in Jacob's conversation with, I'll call him Stephen, and should I call him by his title is an interesting point of conversation as well, and it may be a point of disagreement between me and Jacob. But the Orthodox teacher, Stephen, they had a good conversation, and in the comments, it was noted how Jacob mentioned the idea that Mary could have been a prostitute, and Jesus may have come about because of that. And as soon as you say something like that, for people who have a story about the virgin birth that is like essential to their worldview, it will cut off their ears. And I'm sure there's something in the holy book about cutting off people's ears, which means you cause them not to be able to listen to you. So, if we're trying to have a conversation, if we're trying to do just chatting, then it's nice not to cut off people's ears. Hello.
Hey, Gavin.
How are
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Man. Yeah, I think I was coming across the wrong way to our friend in chat,
Yep.
but
Text can do that.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's one of those things like what's a good way to put it, right? Like the life of, like, if you're going to be a Mormon, right? You need to know about the life of Joseph Smith, right? If you're going to be a Jew, then the life of Moses, right? That's important. Um, those sort of things, right? And that's really all I was getting at was, it's not like it's kind of, for Christians, the who Jesus is like and what he taught is like it's kind of all wrapped up in the Gospels, right? But I just one of the things I've noticed for you know for people that are thinking about Islam and the rest of it is that a lot of times we'll spend a lot of time in the Quran, but and then but not really know like about the life of the prophet that that they're going to be following.
So
Yeah.
if you let's say you are given prophecy from God, um, and say you're even a person who changes over time, it's like, do you like allow the person's past and the things I did when I was 16, 17, 18 years old, at what point, um, the things that I did in the past, like, do those influence how people treat me now because I'm no longer past Gavin? So yeah, that's kind of what comes to mind.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is like, I mean, the Muslim biographies, as far as I know, like, they don't really, I mean, they touch on his childhood. He was, as far as I know, he was, orphaned, raised by his uncle, I think, for the most part, if I remember correctly. Um, and it's not like he has some deep dark past that anybody should be ashamed of, as far as I know. But yeah,
Okay. And I
yeah,
mean, are you, but you don't want to actually, it sounds like you don't actually want to point out, for example, things that you read that Muhammad did um, that you would disagree with, for example. That's not what you're trying to do. You were just basically encouraging the you know the basically reading of the history, which does raise an important question about, well, how much history is trustworthy. I think Krish is pointing out, basically, during the time of Joseph, the title Pharaoh never existed, but during Moses, it knew that it existed. So I mean, what I get from that is that we can have disagreements about the story, the historical story as well. And then for me, the question is, how important is it to get these historical stories right?
well, I mean, part of the thing with the Quran is that it's not um, the surahs aren't in chronological order. I think if I remember correctly, they're like I think they're ordered in some kind of arbitrary way, right? I think they might be like Paul's books. Like Paul's books are for the most part ordered largest to smallest, which is really kind of random if you really think about it. But like with the surahs, like there's and the Quran, there's a lot of I mean, there's interpretation required in terms of what came before and what came, earlier revelation versus later. That rolls into how you interpret the Quran, and also like being able to place those surahs in the time frame when they were given, right, to Muhammad. That's all important stuff, as far as I understand, for trying to understand what Islam is and what it teaches. And not only that, just in general, right? There is this idea in Islam that like if you're going to be a Muslim, then you need to aspire to, if you're a male, of course, right? You need to, in some sense, aspire to, to follow Muhammad's model, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I'm not trying to be shady there. I mean, it's just if somebody's wanting to look into Islam, right? I mean, look into all of it, right? you that's all I was trying to get at. So yeah.
Yeah. I guess if you read a biography, there's a question on, and if you read any type of history, what can be trusted, what can be believed. To me, that's why I tend to avoid worrying about the past that much and being like more future oriented and present oriented. But
Yeah, yeah.
It's just
Uh,
pragmatic for me, or else
yeah,
I couldn't sit there and it's going to come down to I think this is true as far as what happened in the past, and someone else thinks something else is true. And I don't know where that gets you. If you play that game, where does it get you?
yeah. Well, and with the Hadith and how that works inside of Islam, and there's lots of contention about which sayings are actually trustworthy, and there's as far as I know, different schools of thought in terms of you know yeah, how they put together what's trustworthy out of the different collections versus what isn't. But as far as I know, like the biographies of Muhammad are like the Muslim ones. I think were relatively early. Within a couple hundred years after after he died, and I don't think there's much of any contention inside of Islam, just in terms of whether or not they're considered trustworthy, for the faith, right? That sort of thing. So.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like there's an authority. There's some way of determining what is authorized and who accepts it and things like that.
Yeah, did you watch? I think Paul's PVK's stream this morning actually touched on it because it was talking about Andrew Tate and it was funny because like there were two Muslims and they were talking about Andrew Tate, and one of the questions that came up was like I guess somebody had asked this guy like should now that Tate's a Muslim, should he be trusted for wisdom? And the guy was saying something very I think you know very simple, I would say, for most anyone of any faith, right? Like why would you look to a brand new convert to like, to explain complicated things as it pertains to your faith, but
Yeah, I mean, but then there's even differences. Like there's different kinds of Muslims, right?
oh yeah,
There's
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, Shia, Sunni, and some others that are a lot more obscure, but yeah.
right. Yeah, I mean, if even if you try to get the most qualified, most experienced, knowledgeable person on earth, it's like there's still going to be someone that's very similarly qualified who disagrees.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, and you can almost think of it as like, Protestants and Roman Catholics, or Roman Catholics versus Eastern Orthodox, or that sort of thing, like the Shia and the Sunni, I think, like that split, I think was maybe 2 generations after Muhammad, I think, maybe something like that. But
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, there's the topic here that I treat as important, like as honesty. And so I guess I don't understand. Like I guess I gave up on this wanting to know what was historically true. You could even go back to like 9/11. Questions of what was historically true, what happened on 9/11, and you could even look at the previous elections. It's like whatever happened in the past. There's a question about what is historically true, and there's going to be people who disagree, and I don't know. Um, I don't know the importance of it. I don't know the importance of picking a side um, and saying this is what was historically true. This is why I have an issue with religion and some people's holy books, right? Like picking one holy book over another, things like that,
Yeah.
including historical books or people who wrote history.
Well, I think, I mean, you go full postmodern on it, and everything should be read, completely cynically, and you know, and you need to psychoanalyze, or pretend as if you're psychoanalyzing, the author, regardless of the source, and that sort of thing. And yeah,
Well,
I mean, I kind of look at it from the perspective of, um, there was a real, Muhammad, right? There was a real Jesus, there was a real Paul of Tarsus, and so on and so forth, right?
okay.
Um, and people. will disagree about what they were trying to teach, right? People will disagree about, maybe their character or what exactly happened over the course of their life, so on and so forth. But, I tend to say there's arguments in that space that are useless, right? And then, but there are arguments in that space that I think are somewhat important. And even if we disagree with someone, right, about the reality of who Jesus was, for example, right? Did Jesus die on the cross, right? that's the let's see the if it, the Christian believes he died and was resurrected. The Muslim believes he didn't die, and then the Jew believes he died and wasn't resurrected. So so there's there's different takes on those things, and and people, I hope with a clear conscience, in their disagreement, disagree on such things. But
it seemed like I'd mentioned the spirit of contention. It seems like people can become possessed by this fighting about what happened, and I think there's something about reputation perhaps connected to it. Like I know that if someone mischaracterizes, me, then that hurts. And then perhaps people identify with a group, and and people have a story about their group, and so when you mischaracterize the thing they identify with, they have a similar feeling, like it's almost like a lie,
yeah,
that people are lying about who they are, right? They take it very personally.
yeah. Well, and I think part of it too, sometimes, right? I'm not saying this is all the time, but I think sometimes there's there's an issue of like you're getting at, it comes across as a personal attack, right? When somebody disagrees with your take on things, right?
Or
And
if you
and
just,
and,
yeah,
and
even if you're
yeah,
just observing and you're not trying to be mean or anything, people can take offense and get defensive.
yeah. And maybe, like, putting Islam aside for a moment, let's just say somebody's a 9/11 truther, right? And
I went down the rabbit
and
hole. I did go
yeah,
down the rabbit hole.
yeah, and well, and in some sense, like, if that's really important to you, then your identity does become wrapped up in that, um, in that narrative, and what you believe about that narrative, and yeah, and so for somebody to make fun of it, or ridicule it, or defame it, right, or
Right.
mischaracterize it, like you were saying, yeah, I mean, that's a real thing, man. Like, that's yeah, um, yeah, not trying to make light of that either. So yeah,
Also, hello, Chad. You're welcome to hop on and explain what's in your video. I only have one screen. Um, I haven't tried sharing screens and stuff, especially with one screen. But you're welcome to hop in and explain your video that's covering all this. But
oh, and
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and Chris, sorry, man, I'm just figuring out how to work StreamYard, so I'm checking out your comments right now. So sorry if I was coming across like I was ignoring you, but
Well, I do see Crush has a story. That's what I mean. I very quickly can. This is me doing an analysis, and there's a story that Chris kind of treats as being mapped onto what actually happened in reality, and that's what people do. Jacob likes to do that. I try not to do that. Like I don't. Postmodernism is not a bad word for me because I'm an engineer. I don't know how many postmodernist engineers there are, but like because it's a valid criticism of postmodernists who want to criticize everything and destroy everything, um, be, because it's easy to destroy but it's hard to create. So you have to combine that willingness to criticize and destroy with a seriousness in taking ownership and being willing to help build things so that you can minimize suffering and harm. And there is a way to build things so that the that there's an easy kind of lowest amount of pain transition into something better that doesn't have as many criticisms, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Chad has a bad reception. Yeah, the thing that happens on this corner, and a lot of people like talking about what is true and what happened, and that's why sometimes I feel like I'm kind of outside the corners because I don't see that being productive, but at the same time, it's cool doing this, learning how to have conversation, and learning people's perspectives. I think that's the best I can do with people who want to, you know, talk about history and their religion and their perspective on things.
Well, but I think part of it too, though, like part of my interest in it, and like part of the reason why I've read up as much as I have on Islam and so on and so forth, right? Is I've got people that I know that are Muslims, right? And I care very much about them, and what I'd like to try and do, right, is to try and understand, as best as I can from a distance, right? Like how they understand the world and how they understand their faith and those sort of things, right?
So Chris mentioned modesty, and so you have this. What comes to mind is people wearing clothes, right? To some extent, covering themselves. And then in my mind, I'm like, you know, I know that if you go to a tribe in the in the middle of the jungle and they're not wearing any clothes, it's like the amount of rape that's going to happen there is going to be different. The amount of I remember Aubrey Marcus talking to Jonathan Pajot about it. It's like if you just go into a room and you see a vagina, all the time, eventually you're going to be like an OBGYN, right? You're going to uh, be able to handle the situation and you're not going to become aroused and things like that. So there's a trade-off. This modesty being upheld, there's a trade-off. That's what I like to look at. Or what is the danger of your value hierarchy? What is the danger of the story you tell yourself? There's trade-off. I mean, there's a good thing about it. The modesty will have good things, but there's also going to be bad things. It's not all good. Whatever your story is, whatever your thing you put at the top of the hierarchy, or right underneath God or whatever.
Well, and there's a weird thing about taboos, I think, and maybe I'm not sure, maybe the right way to say this, but like sometimes taboos can work to kind of like maybe to your point, right? They can work to kind of like almost fetishize, right? Certain things.
Yeah, I'm reading a Brandon Sanderson book, and it's the Stormlight Archives, and the women have to cover their safe hand, like they have a hand that they have to cover, and from the perspective of the characters, if the character sees someone's safe hand, it like arouses them, or if the female like exposes her safe hand, then she will blush, right? So we don't have that concept, but to me, that is what can happen in the mind of the human who lives within a culture like that. They also have a culture where the people with light eyes are treated as superior to the people with dark eyes. But
yeah.
But yeah, I see that happening throughout the world. Like that's what people are doing, and you have people arguing about their way being better than other people's way.
Well, it's like I mean, it's kind of a joke, I think, in American circles, like the idea of like oh, or maybe British as well. I think maybe they could make the joke from the Victorian era, about like seeing a woman's ankle, like oh,
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Well,
or
in our society, it would be nipples, right? There's something about nipples that would do something to to people in our culture and the same thing would not happen in many other cultures that exist right now, right? The mind has been conditioned to respond to certain experiences. It's kind of like the Pavlov's dog, kind of. And that, yeah. And my take is that the people who are best able to kind of bypass their conditioning and observe it, those are people, and this might be my bias, but those are people who they can do things, they can see things, right, that most people who are just controlled by their conditioning will not be able to do and will not be able to see. So sometimes our conditioning leads us into war and killing each other. And like regarding 9/11, the thing that sticks out for me is that maybe there was one congressman that's like, maybe we should take some time to think about this, right? But within however many hours, almost 100% of the people are voting to go into Iraq or something like that, right? This is what you have are these creatures, right? Most of us, we all have this human nature, and we're all being shaped, and we're like Pavlov's dog, and that's what I saw, and that's what I see often. This is what makes me stressed out about humans, is because I see humans like being these conditioned creatures who are irrational beings who are doing this. So it's a little bit scary. It's a little bit scary.
Well, and I hate to bring up the term egregore, but I don't know. I prefer to use something along the lines of like zeitgeist or something like that, right? The spirit of the crowd, right?
Right.
It certainly has a pull on us,
And spirit is a good word. Yeah, I noticed that. Oh, I lost him. But yeah, I've noticed spirits. I've tried to pay attention to spirits. And if you pay attention, you can notice yourself having your emotions pulled one way or another because of some stimulus and some spirit that has taken you. And some are better than others. Some spirits are better than others. But there's a link at the top. There we go. We got Bazzini back.
Sorry. I need to figure out how to use this thing.
Yeah, the user experience confused me. The other day, I thought that Jacob had given my seat to someone else. That was my first thought. And then when I reached out to him, I'm like, I'm curious what happened. It's like, either you gave my seat to someone or there's an operator error and I messed up, or there's a bug in the software. And then about 30 minutes later, I was like, oh, it was an operator error.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, if you end up giving the seat to someone else, that's okay with me. But yeah, this software, it's pretty cool, but there's some learning. It's like any tool. You have to learn how to use it.
Yeah. Yeah, I accidentally hit done. I'm on a mobile, and I hit done, and it kicked me out of the whole thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would just carried on with spirit. Like I remember I graduated from Auburn University, and I was into Auburn football. And this year I haven't watched one Auburn football game, but I remember watching a game, and Auburn had been doing really well game after game, and they were playing, and they were down but like by 3 touchdowns at the half, and I felt depressed. Like I felt like I was going to cry. And I just realized like how silly it was. But that's what happens to us. It's like, and you can really pay attention to, the spirit that is kind of that is motivating you. And some spirits are better than others. Maybe it's a skill, and maybe it's a skill we don't teach people we don't teach people how to be aware of the spirit that is motivating us.
Yeah, well, it's certainly something I mean, I think when I was a kid, we would talk about like peer pressure, right? But I think there's more to it than that, like I think that's a very low resolution way to look at it,
Well, it's they seem connected,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Definitely. Like we do mimicry. We will mimic people that we are around very naturally. I think that's how we learn. I think that's what Rene Girard talks about.
Yeah.
But
Mimetic
something very
design.
fundamental, something very fundamental about human nature.
Yeah.
And then I think Paul, one of the recent things he's kind of hit on is, or at least he showed a clip where they were talking about the contagion. Like there's a contagion, for example, with regard to transgenderism, for example, right? Um, so the, like this thing that we're talking about, these spirits, the fact that we are shaped by what we give our attention to and what we treat as sacred and who the authorities are, like this stuff is really important. It's really powerful.
Yeah. Well, and
And
it's
I
also
don't even have to pick a side. I can just see that it's powerful.
yeah. Well, and the working of it is so subtle too. Like you hang out with a group of guys or whatever, right? And like before you know it, when you're in that context, you'll like your manner of speaking might change.
Oh yeah.
I mean, just little, weird things like that. I mean, things that probably aren't really that important, but it's
What's
just
interesting, there's some
yeah,
people who they keep their accent no matter who they hang out with, but then there's some people who will their accent will kind of mold into wherever they are, like a chameleon. It's like some people can be like a chameleon, and some people don't do that. I've noticed that as well.
huh,
Like, I'm from Alabama, and there's people who have a thicker accent than I do, and it seems like their accent won't change. It's kind of stuck. Um,
yeah,
like in my from someone as someone whose accent does change because I want to communicate in a way that other people understand me better. Um, it seems like those people whose accent does not change. It seems like they are doing it intentionally, but I'm I also I doubt that. I think that it's just they have no concern in the world about that. And then I'm also reminded of Tai Chi. I told my father-in-law I took a few Tai Chi classes and I learned how to walk. And he's like, you can't like relearn how to walk. And I mean, that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with people who have learned a certain way of being um, and even believe that, there are things about each individual that cannot change. That we're kind of stuck the way we are. These are the things I find fascinating,
yeah.
more so than the history of some people or religion or anything like that.
Well, but it's all of it together, I think,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
like the true things that you can find in history. I think a lot of those you can find right here. Like you can even find like there's these kind of fractal patterns. You know, you can read about it in fiction, and you can see that in the fiction, it's actually in your life. In the relationship between you and your spouse or you and your children or your parents, right? There are true things that happen. There are true patterns that happen. And those are the important things. The details about the person and the name and the date, they just were never interesting to me. I guess they're relevant if you're trying to do it, have a court and you're going to decide on someone's punishment or something.
well, but I think even then, yeah, I mean, to try and do that from a distance, like I can't remember who it was. I ran across somebody. They were talking about presentism yesterday.
What's
And
the
just
word?
presentism.
I haven't heard of that.
So it's kind of a pejorative term, but it's kind of this idea that we can and we should be able to judge the past from where we sit today, right? According to our context and our morality and our understanding of things and
This person has not read about chaos.
Well, I mean, but also it's I mean the point they made, which I thought was fair, is like this at some level this is this might be like you trying to judge yourself when you were 10 years old for what you didn't know when you were 10 years old, right? That sort of thing, right?
Right.
And
And that's not something I was trying to tell my wife. It's like at some point we got to make a decision and we're going to make a mistake and we're going to try the best we can. And when we realize we made a mistake, we shouldn't be ashamed and we should not be mad at ourselves. And we shouldn't feel like, oh, we should have done something different because you couldn't have, if you really tried, you couldn't have done anything different. Right. You just learn from your mistakes. And the next time you have a similar situation, you try to make a better decision. Right.
well, I think that's kind of where the idea of wisdom, right? And all the faith and actually all the cultures up until it seems like very recently, have always had a tradition of teaching wisdom. But I think maybe what we don't like about wisdom is that it doesn't give us simplistic rules, right, on for everything.
Yeah, but I guess um, where are the wise people, and why aren't they being treated with respect? On as far as where our attention goes, maybe that's what we're trying to do a little more of on this corner of the internet. Is we care about wisdom a little bit. I don't think you'll find wisdom in the in that football game I'm not watching, or the elections and the campaigns, or on the mainstream media. It's hard to find it on social media. Yeah, I definitely feel like there's a wisdom deficiency in my life.
Okay. My audio cut out. Okay. So,
Yeah, I
yeah.
think you probably your headset unplugged or something or went out.
No, I got a call and it cut off access to my mic for some reason. So yeah.
Yeah, I was just acknowledging that it does seem like we yeah, we are missing, like we have a wisdom deficiency. I feel that in my personal life. I feel that like at larger scales in my neighborhood, city, state, whatnot. Like, and then maybe, yeah, that's kind of what, yeah, that's what I like craving for is I'm craving wisdom, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the conversations that happen about, history and religion, it doesn't, if it can be connected to wisdom, if it can be connected to something useful, then that would be good. And then something that's always useful in what we're doing here is learning how to have conversations and disagree, and appreciate uh, multiple perspectives. So,
Right. Yeah.
which I think that has been absent. Like in my entire life, it's been absent. And I mean, I grew up without a mother, so I didn't even have that in my personal life of seeing people have disagreements and settle them. It's something I tell my wife. It's like we need to make sure our children see us disagree and handle disagreement, right?
Yeah. No.
It's-
Absolutely.
but yeah,
Well, and,
I don't see people doing that in the world. we
well,
we're very quick to become angry and start breaking stuff.
yeah. Well, it's interesting though because like there's an Old Testament scholar when he was talking about the book of Proverbs, but one of the ways he described wisdom is he called it learned relational skill. And I thought that was pretty interesting, especially in context to what you just said, like
Yeah,
how to disagree and
yeah,
well, and how to respect disagreement too, right? Like like the Muslim people I know, right? Like there's some really important things that we disagree about, but you know like at the
like
same
nipples.
yeah, or whatever, right? Well, I mean, the yeah, my extended Muslim family is kind of they're not the most strictly adherent,
Okay.
observant, I guess you could say, but um, Not that they run around with their nipples out, but
Right. Well, I had a coworker who was in Karachi, and he rented a swimming pool. But basically, the males and the females would be in different swimming pools, right? So it's, yeah, there's a totally different culture. I felt like you were going to make a point there, and then I interrupted you.
Oh, well, and then I got distracted by something that somebody asked me. Sorry, one of those things like that.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah. But yeah, that ability to like to still respect somebody else as a person, right? And respect their beliefs, even if you think their beliefs are wrong, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where everybody gets really confused right now. I think is it's the idea, and again we'll put Islam to the side for a second, but that
It started breaking up a little. Bazzini got another phone call. I can break away to the background music. It's like Jeopardy. Gonna run some people off with the music they don't like. If you're still there, Bazzini, I'm not hearing anything you're saying. Just so you know. There is a link at the top of the live chat. There we go. I get a break from work and he disappears. Oh, he's back? Is he back? No. Yeah, I definitely need a conversation partner. Whenever I can ramble, and then I can end up saying things that get me in trouble. So feel free to chat with text or hop in the live stream. I like to try to bend everything toward reality. Here, I'll try to keep it productive. Here we go. Michael. Hey, Michael.
Hello.
How are you? I feel like there's a big lag that you're experiencing right now.
Well, I'm not hearing anything.
You're not hearing anything.
What's wrong with my side?
Test, test. Do I have to speak louder?
Can you hear me?
I hear you. I do hear you. You don't hear me.
Okay. Now I can hear you.
Cool. We definitely need some This Little Corner Jeopardy. I have a game board begun, but need some good questions and answers. I've played this at work. I saw that Chad had put out this idea. But yeah, this is it's a fun activity. you just need enough people. Actually, I guess you only need a handful, right? So how are you, Michael? You look frozen. Solo layout Bazzini. Bazzini looks ripped, small and ripped. Let's see. Exit solo layout. I probably have about 30 more minutes, but yeah, you're welcome to hop in. I try to participate when people start talking about history and religion. It's I tend to stay at a meta level, and but yeah, I find the meta level conversation of things like history and religion and politics, I find that most interesting. It's partly because I'm not an expert at any of it. And then, like, I know that it's good to have experts at these things. But at a meta level, I would love to talk to experts and have them kind of bring it home and explain the importance of the thing they are an expert in.
Yeah, but I think even an expert, and sorry, I had somebody had something absolutely urgent that they had to talk about. So,
I understand.
But I think the thing though is like an expert on history, right? You can be an expert on history, I think, and in my view, if you really know your subject, there should be a humility there, right? That
Yeah.
You're looking at things from a really big distance, right?
Right.
And you're looking at things that people have disagreed about. Just like the 2020 election, example, right? I mean, like there's two sides to that story, and and so there's at some level there's at least two competing accounts of what happened last that year, that sort
Right.
of thing, and
Right.
yeah.
And then, I mean, we aren't even good at identifying who deserves the most attention when reporting on what happened. So, like the people who do not deserve the most attention often get the most attention, which is not a good recipe. Like to go back to the idea that we don't care about wisdom. Like it seems like it unwise for deceptive people who want more money and power to be getting most of the attention. That doesn't seem right. Here we go. Daniel Tang is an expert. So, yeah, trust me.
What are we talking about? I mean, I heard a little bit of it, but then I kind of missed some when I was trying to get connected.
Well, how would you describe what's the part that is most interesting about this conversation, Bazzini, for you?
Well, I think it's at some level it's kind of like the thing we always talk about, right? But trying to understand each other and trying to understand how this other person makes sense of the world, and maybe how that can help me better make sense of the world, that sort of thing, right? I think that's for me that's a big part of this little quarter, right?
Yeah.
Right.
It's the participatory knowledge of how can different people who have disagreements communicate respectfully. That's pretty important, and it's something that has been missing in the world. So, but I think at some point we actually have to disagree with each other on something, right? We have to find the thing we disagree about, and then figure out how to engage with each other about the things we disagree about. And so, at some point, you could explicitly say, "Gavin, I think you made a mistake on this," or "Gavin, I strongly disagree with your opinion on this," right?
But also I think part of it, and maybe this gets back into wisdom, but I heard somebody point this out, that like a truth, right, or something that I'm trying to communicate to you that I think is true, right? Um, that's that's only really going to be accepted or heard in a real way, by somebody you consider to be, somewhat trustworthy, right? Somebody that you think has maybe has your best interests in mind, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that perhaps the people on this little corner aren't doing it for money, and we aren't doing it for power. Like that would be, maybe there are, but I've heard that expressed, and that might be one of the one of the best things about kind of the network that we're participating in is that we aren't, like, I'm not trying to extract money from you, and I'm not trying to get you to make me president of the United States. So I'm not trying to use you.
But that's one of the tough parts, though, because it's like, um, I just remember a few times when Paul, would talk highly of people, getting on YouTube and all the rest of it. It's kind of like, because it's not. I'm not saying like this is any of you guys or Jacob or anything like that, but you just see it so often with people that I think Twitch streamers are like the most stereotypical about it. Like it's at first it's kind of about fun, right? Or whatever, right? But then it becomes this mad rush to build the platform and build the community around it, and at some level it becomes this like I think it always has this temptation to become like a Tower of Babel type thing, right? Build this thing, make a name for myself.
Are there real towers of Babel that we've experienced in our recent history? Because everybody talks about the Tower of Babel, but is there something in our world right now that is like a Tower of Babel?
Well, I guess I was using it in that context. I was using it in a very kind of loose way, right? Because I think, given how, in large part, how individualistic things often are, right? I think it's more like Shelley's Ozymandias poem, right?
I don't know what you're referring to.
Okay, so if you ever get the chance, look up Breaking Bad Ozymandias, I think, or something like that, and it's Bryan Cranston, who's the main actor out of Breaking Bad, and basically it's a bunch of like kind of the fill shots that they would do for that show that were so iconic, like the slow panning of, like a barbed wire fence in the desert with something hanging off of it and blowing in the wind or something like that. But it's Bryan Cranston reading the poem Ozymandias by Shelley, right? And that poem is all about. Man, I wish I could remember it and I could just say it, but it's basically like the concept or the setting of the poem is. There's an ancient traveler, going through an ancient land, right? And
I can read it.
And
Ozymandias by Percy Shelley.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed, and on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away."
So kind of the the image there is somebody coming up to. So Ozymandias was the Greek name for Ramses the Great, right? And Ramses the Great, which I don't think they knew at the time, but Ramses the Great not only did he build a whole bunch of statues of himself, right? He also stamped his name on a bunch of other people's buildings, right? You know, kind of claiming what they had built for himself in his name. But kind of the idea being, right? You know, here was somebody who, you know, basically, you know, considered himself like to be the ruler of the world, right? And the greatest that's ever lived, you know, that sort of thing, right? And in the course of his life, probably, you know, took out all sorts of cruelties on all sorts of people, right, to get where he was going, right? But in the end, you know, like all that's, you know, kind of left of him is like this busted up statue in the middle of the desert, you know, with this, you know, with his sneering face, you know, like the head on the, you know, falling off and laying in the ground, right? And the inscription on it saying, you know, like, you know, look on all my works in despair, you know, you know, I'm such a bad A, you know, but I think that's to me that's kind of like that's that temptation, like in its maybe in its fullest extent, you know.
I think that, you know, that's like the way a Tower of Babel always will appear in hindsight. And it's kind of like, you know, how could we not have known that was not, you know, as because I think that the Tower of Babel story is really what the closest analogy I could think for today is like when we talk about these echo chambers, which do happen on like social media and stuff, because they had one language, you know, and they had one vocabulary, or as it says. And so, you know, and that's the problem when people get like super sucked into a certain ideology and then they're in one of these echo chamber environments. There's no way out of it, really. And you know, that the extreme, you know, the historical examples of that is stuff like, you know, Nazi Germany. It's like everybody, you know, before the war is over, you know, or, you know, when they're starting to attack everybody's on the same page. They all think it's so obvious that this is the way things should be, because they have no mechanism to deal with outside thinking. Anything that's opposing that just goes into the one category of like the enemy or whatever. So in that way, I would say that, yeah, while individual like YouTube channels and stuff can definitely succumb to that, this little corner is kind of a really it is an anti-Tower of Babel, so long as new people and new ideas keep kind of coming in and getting wrestled with.
Well, and as long as we don't, do you guys remember, Paul? Man, this must have been like a couple of years ago, but I think Paul Vanderklay was tweeting around and talking about this article called the Internet of Beefs. Do you guys remember that?
Yeah, I do remember hearing a little bit about that. Yeah.
I don't remember that one.
So
I think I heard it secondhand, but like, you know, him referring to it later on. But
yeah, so the concept kind of ascribed there, right, is that and I think maybe just, you know, we'll play it out in the context of Twitter, right? You know, is that kind of you've got people that are mooks, right? And then you've got people that are kind of aspiring knights, right? And the knights want to be leaders for the mooks, right? Because that's how they get their you know, that's how they you know, they get their sense of self-worth, right? You know, they're going to be a leader, so they're always looking for causes, or they're looking for things to kind of get the crowd riled up, right, about, because in some sense the crowd being stirred up you know, by it is kind of how their platform works, right? And that's how they get their self-worth and you know, that sort of thing, right? But there's this one comment in there that's just absolutely hilarious, right? and it's talking about, like, essentially, if you think of somebody who's one of these people on Twitter, right? That's maybe they have tens or hundreds of thousands of followers, right? And they essentially, like, you log into Twitter in the morning to find out what your mooks are getting pissed off about, because in the comment in the article is something along the lines of where did my mooks go, right? I must get out in front of them to lead them, or something like that, and essentially what it's describing there is what otherwise might be called audience capture, right? But the idea that in some sense, somebody who's a leader of a community, right, or or a firebrand, or whatever, right? In some sense, they wind up reflecting the community, right? And Gavin, you mentioned Gerard earlier, but so they wind up basically the community winds up in some sense often kind of shaping where they go and what they talk about, right? Because in some sense that person has become a reflection of the community.
Yeah. There's a question of where should we go and what should we talk about, right?
Yeah.
Paul Vanderklay has been called homeroom, for example, but then sometimes people end up having some type of an impact on the homeroom teacher, and all of a sudden people might start talking about one topic, right? And for me, that's pretty powerful, and so there's these nested hierarchies for our attention. At some point we could talk about something that's so important that it somehow pops out of our hierarchy into higher level hierarchies, right? But yeah, I look at, but I don't know how that happens. But there's a question. Yeah, I like that question. Well, what is the modern day Tower of Babel? And then I also like the question, what's the thing that we should be talking about? What's the most important thing we should be talking about? I think Jacob said that recently that he thinks we need to be talking about civil war, or the possibility of civil war in the United States, for example.
Scary thing to consider,
Well, my first impression was not in Alabama. What happens is these high density population centers where that you end up with the violence. And what's interesting is, like, so Jacob is kind of in that. Maybe you guys are in it to some degree, but and then the what people pay attention to is largely influenced by what's happening in these larger cities, which is mostly irrelevant to the entire world. So I don't know how we can change the conversation. Like, I'm interested in trying to do that. I don't necessarily think civil war is the topic we should be talking about. We could be talking about, why do we go to war? That would be the meta topic.
Or also that dynamic where we increasingly, and I think in large part via echo chambers, right? We increasingly, I heard somebody point out one time that as social media developed, right, it started off with people that of differing viewpoints, kind of talking together, right? But then it increasingly became a discussion of in groups, and then basically talking about what they agree on, right? But then, like, it since then it's increasingly become a discussion inside of the in group about how horrible the out group is, right? It's like I don't know what comes after that, right? But there's this, and I mean, you see it all over the place where there's this kind of increasingly toxic rhetoric and distrust and hermeneutic of suspicion. Maybe you could call it that. I mean, but it's not like that's exclusively a progressive or woke thing, right? But I mean, but you see this stuff like the velocity seems to be increasing in some sense, and that can't be headed anywhere good.
What's interesting is there.
I have a thought.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Michael.
Oh, well, I think that these, well, I think like you can say, this corner seems like a relatively healthy kind of community. I think one aspect of it is, in fact, that there's so much like random different stuff, which almost makes it hard like to figure out like what is the common things that binds everyone together. I think it is maybe just a desire to have communication and to learn and to be understood. But I see this kind of echo chamber thing in a broader sense. Like our society has moved so much towards specialization in so many areas, and against like generalization. And so people have there's, whenever you're specializing, you're super focusing on a certain small group of topics that you know and study and that pertains to your life, and then you just the amount of things that goes into.
We got the frozen screen.
Oh
No.
Okay. Yeah, we can hear you again, Michael.
Am I there?
Now you're back.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I mean, I think specialization is great because it can give you efficiency towards certain goals and tasks. But if people become too specialized, then they don't have any point of connection with other people. And that's the problem. Like, people used to have to have a certain general amount of knowledge about a broad range of subjects, and so there's, if you were at a dinner party with some stranger, there's going to be at least something that you can talk to them about, even if your differences are not aligned very much. But increasingly, there's less and less common ground between any given people.
I was talking to a kid last night about, funny enough, we're talking about, I brought up the term reciprocal narrowing, to like a 15-year-old, but we were talking about, kind of the cycle of addiction, and also the, I think what I might call here like the cycle of nihilism, in some level, but that sense in which, people become profoundly disconnected, and he was telling me about, kids at his school that, like they come to school and then, they go home and they don't really ever talk to anybody, and, but, maybe they're on their phones a lot, that sort of thing. And he was talking about how, like, he kind of saw himself being, getting in that same cycle of, again, spending all this time with these people, kind of virtually, but like, I don't really know them, that sort of thing. And it was just, it's kind of interesting.
Well, it makes me think too, like, there's not a lot of opportunity just for people to learn, because that kind of participatory knowledge of things is so important. Like, I can take an example of, like, so I started playing the guitar when I was like 12, and the thing that made me want to keep playing, actually, was when I was a little older, is that I had other friends who played, and they played badly, and they were in like punk bands and stuff, but it was like, oh, well, if I just practice a little bit more, I'm good enough to be in a band with these guys or whatever, and we can do our thing. Whereas now it's like, if somebody wants to learn how to play the guitar, they're going to go on YouTube or something, and the people that they're going to be exposed to are like so phenomenal, and they're just, pure virtuosos, that it's almost like, oh, what's the point? You're never going to get there. Like we've lost the areas where people can like explore being a person in a, badly, to figure out what they like and don't like. And unfortunately, it seems like, that what's the area that we've said it's okay to do that in is like gender and sexuality, which is a pretty destructive area to experiment in that regard. But there you go. So, but I think that kind of analogy you could take to a lot of different areas, that the because you're not learning well-rounded things necessarily from your parents anymore. And so everything is directed on a school path towards a career based out of that. And then you're very specialized. Like from a young age, you become specialized. And that makes it almost is like it makes different species of humans in a way.
I find it interesting, all the different things that people are interested in. Like I did that spreadsheet and asked people, what's your goal in the corner? And similarly, you can ask, well, what's the Tower of Babel in the world? You could say, well, who's the enemy? What are you interested in? You've got Miles over here going through the NATO memberships. I know that, which could be interesting. And so, Michael, I know you're interested in figuring out a way to get people to kind of do some spiritual kind of learning through carpentry, for example, or woodworking. It's like we all have these different things we're interested in.
Yeah.
Very different people. I do think that the thing that I think that's missing, like that nobody really knows how to do. So when you go on YouTube, you can find the person who's the expert at something. I actually think this is great. It sounds like I'm bragging. I predicted this a long time ago about how education would change, but I don't see the thing that teaches us how to get along with people who disagree with us. Like we don't have something like that, like the experts at doing that. That's the reason I'm here, right? It's the reason I stopped what I was doing and went looking. It's like I saw, people don't know how to have conversations. I can't find anyone who knows how to have a conversation. And then, I have found people who know how to do it, and I practice doing it with my wife and children, but it's not becoming popular on YouTube. And perhaps this is something that we could also practice doing as well. So again, the other day I asked my children, I said, what kind of mistakes did I make today? I asked all my children, I asked my wife, and I got them to tell me what I did wrong. I do think it would be nice to have those kinds of conversations. And so if any of you, and I'm going to have to go soon, but if anybody ever wants to have that kind of conversation where we find the thing we disagree on the most, that we're most passionate about and disagree on, I think it would be good to do it. I had one conversation on my channel with a guy named Brent Cooper, who's kind of a postmodernist, and it wasn't a very good conversation. It was supposed to be the introduction to a conversation where I basically just listened to him. All I did was listen, but there was no invitation for him or curiosity from him to listen to me. So it was just me listening to him. So I've failed to be able to have conversations with people I disagree with. I can listen to people that I disagree with, but that's the thing that I would like to see more of. I'd like to try to do it, figure out how to do it respectfully. I think one of the reasons I like Jacob and I'm attracted to Jacob is because I'm seeing him have conversations with people he disagrees with. And I think him doing it in person, not in person, but in a Zoom meeting like this, or a virtual space like this where you can see facial expressions and hear tone, I think that's really important. I had asked the question the other day, what would happen if you could go through all of the Jewish written law? You can go through all of the debates that were happening in the text, and if you could somehow have those with tone and facial expressions, right? Um,
Mm.
so I like to think we're trying to do that, trying to figure it out. And I would like to. I've tried to provoke people into having hard conversations with me. Like I think I tried to provoke Joey, for example, to do that. Um, but it was through text. It didn't work out well. But yeah, if anyone ever wants to have a conversation, I guarantee you, you're doing something that I could point at and and disagree with you on it, and get you into a defensive stance. Like if we were to have a conversation long enough about things you care about, so
But I
I
think
th-
there's a certain spirit to where that can be constructive, and where it can build mutual respect instead of animosity, and mutual understanding instead of just noise and yelling, right?
well, I mean, how else will you do error correction and sense making,
Yep.
and how else will you uh, organize groups so that people are in positions where they can do the most good? It's like you have to have these difficult conversations, and we haven't. I haven't been a part of them on the internet. Some of them might be quite scary. You know, if you start talking about transgenderism or take any hot button issue of the times and try to go find someone who is being loud and noisy about it and have a conversation with them, you know, that can be quite the challenge. But
But
I
I
don't
think
see people on
also,
this. I don't see people in this little corner doing that.
but I think also part of it gets back to what we were talking about earlier, though, with the temptation to want a platform build and all the rest of it, right? Like, I suspect, right? I know his name's kind of like, it's almost, but Nathan, right? Like, I, I would imagine that if I just went out and had a beer with Nathan or whatever, right? That would be a different thing than if I if I called into his his YouTube live stream or something like that, right? Those sorts of things, right? And there's something about social media and the temptation to perform for an audience, right? That I think
Yeah.
hinders the ability for people to be real with each other.
Yeah, I actually got into a Twitter thread conversation with Nathan, and some direct messages with him as well. And it's like he faces similar questions of what should I be paying attention to, and then there's questions of, well, what's that going to do to his subscriber count and things like that, right? And the thing I had presented to him, which I thought he would take interesting, is, well, let's try to find people who can do prophecy. That was what I was trying to present to him, and at the end of the day, he wasn't very serious about it. He went to sleep. The next day, he forgot about the conversation. That's what it appears to me. So, uh, yeah, even I think he's being motivated by some spirit or force that has something to do with his subscriber count, if I had to guess.
Well, no, I think no. I'm not saying that's all of it, though. I just think that's something that impacts things, right?
Well, it can
But
change from day to
just
day. I mean, you wake up and you go, and you were talking about mooks. It's like if he just like what we do when we first wake up is so important. Like today, yesterday I woke up and hopefully I'm always gonna, greet my wife, but do I go to Twitter? Do I go to Slack and look at my work? Do I look, what am I looking at first thing in the morning? And that's going to orient you for the day. So, I mean, that level of self-control is something very important that like this question of what should we be paying attention to, it is a very personal question, and it even extends to your community.
Yeah, I think like we're looking at our corner. I think that one reason why it's not surprising that somebody like Nathan wouldn't feel um, like he fits in or whatever is because I think that having humility is kind of a core component of this community, because everybody's there's nobody in this space that's an expert to the extent that they feel no one can challenge them about anything. Well, except maybe Jacob, but not in everything, only in some things. But like, and there's this kind of a tendency, like in academia, where which we have a lot of discussions with people who are in that, or we're commenting on those discussions, and there's a tendency where people don't step on each other's toes. You're an expert in your field, and even though I may be studying your field from a cross-disciplinary viewpoint, you don't step on it. And so that's why it's like, people will criticize everything Jordan Peterson says, except if it's about psychology, because that's the only thing he's allowed to know about. But everything else is like, he's not really qualified, but we just use that as an excuse to criticize what we don't like about his viewpoint. So, I think it's tough if somebody's has no humility whatsoever, or no willingness to consider that maybe somebody else does have a expertise in a field that you're unaware of, that you're not going to be a good conversation partner.
Well, but I think part of it too has to do with maybe the difference between convictions and just less important beliefs.
Yeah.
Like, I think one of the things that I think Nathan wanted to talk to Vanderklay about was essentially like my impression. I'm not sure exactly what he has in mind, but all of Paul's backwards and dangerous beliefs, right? And I think part of that I expect would be maybe the idea that there's a certain type of sexual morality that people ought to aim for, right? And that's good, right? To aim for that. But you talk to somebody who's been a pastor for 40 years or however long Paul's been doing that, and it's and it's not. I mean, at some point, somebody is going to be set in their convictions in a way that somebody who's 20 it just isn't or can't be, right?
Yeah.
And so there's certain things for me that just like I get that like Krish that was on earlier. I mean, or whoever, or maybe Miles, right? Like some of these guys might think I'm some weirdo goofball for for my Christianity or whatever, but and I could respect the fact that they look at me that way, right? And that's okay, right? But at the same time, like I'm happy to talk about those kind of things, right? But at the end of the day, for me, those are issues of conviction, right? That I'm not, that as much as I respect them and so on and so forth, right? But for me, that's not something I'm going to be willing to compromise on without something massively happening to me, right?
Yeah. I'm reminded of what we were talking about earlier, Bazzini, about how we can have an identity that is connected to some story that we tell ourselves, and then once that story receives some type of disagreement or projection or criticism, we can feel like we are attacked. And so I think, for example, Nathan could come in with a criticism, or even the way he treats, Paul Vanderklay or John Vervaeke, and that will cause someone who identifies, with some story that we're telling ourselves about Paul or John, and it can then cause people to become defensive. Like I sense that's what happens. I know Jacob does it. Something like, when I came into this corner, I was quick to point out my criticisms. I was too quick maybe to point out my criticisms of each person, my observations, and I quickly noticed that people did not like that. If I start criticizing Paul Vanderklay Paul might not care, but there are people who respect Paul who will who will care, and they won't want to listen to me. And if I start criticizing John or uh, criticizing Jordan Peterson or whomever, Zach Stein, anyone, these yeah, people immediately will kind of it'll cut off their ears. They will stop listening. I feel like that's what happens with Nathan is he's not showing the kind of respect that a lot of the people in these communities have for essentially Paul or John and whatnot. I think that that kind of thing is happening as well. Like we sometimes become overprotective. As we can do that as individuals within a community, and I've noticed this. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do think too, like it's kind of a thing of, we still have at least like a little bit of general like cultural consideration to say like, oh, this person is a certain age, so they've lived longer, they have more experience, they have these degrees or whatever. So like their opinions are in some sense more valid than this kid who just showed up and started telling him why they're wrong about everything. Like, which I mean, I think that's probably even why somebody like Paul, who's kind of seen this sort of thing play out a lot of time, doesn't even get offended at this point because he sees it exactly for what it is. Whereas maybe others that are not quite as experienced with that sort of just the way things play out would defend him. And I think it's good that people would defend Paul because I think that's like he's the kind of guy where he's so fair and nice and generous towards everyone in his communication that he should be protected by other people from depending on what the kind of criticism is. Like those are the probably the most legit criticisms people make is like he's too nice, he's too generous, he doesn't attack people on their wrong beliefs enough. And it's like, well, okay, but I don't know. That's why it's good to have a community, because having different people play these different roles does contribute to the whole.
I wonder if Bazzini is available. Go ahead and chime in if you want to. Bazzani, maybe. Yeah, I do think sometimes we can become so defensive that we are too quick to ignore legitimate criticism, and that happens on an individual level, and it can happen to people within a community. So it's something that happens. I'm pretty sure, like the way I treat religion and religious people, it probably comes off like what you're saying, Michael, as something that is old and has some type of wisdom that's accumulated over years is being disregarded or disrespected. And why is this child essentially in comparison going to come in and question it and not just question it, but essentially maybe even condemn it, right? Yeah, obviously if you're condemning something that's old, it's can reasonably come off as disrespectful, and you can reasonably assume that the person doing it is being arrogant. But even so, sometimes they're right. So you still have to listen to them.
I think it's important.
Michael, you're muted, but go ahead, Bazzani.
I was just going to say, I think it's important to consider that, is maybe as ridiculous or maybe as harmful or maybe even self-destructive as what we might hold somebody else's, thing, whatever it is, right, to be, right, for them, that's, in some sense, it's something that's precious or sacred, I would love to, while you were talking, I was thinking like how cool it would be if Chad could be on, and if Chad could describe like back when he was an alcoholic and he drank all the time, right? How he would react if somebody came in and started talking ill about alcohol, right? Like like I think there's a certain
I think to your point, the term that I understand it from is it's called reactance, right? Um, but in psychology, but it's this idea that, you know, like if anybody's trying to push you in a certain direction, like there's this like innate tendency to want to just push back just for the sake of pushing back, right? You know, it's kind of like the punk rock, you know, kind of mode, but also kind of like that. Well, I mean, yeah, I guess, yeah, it can play out in other contexts too, I think. But.
Well, yeah, that's the counterintuitive thing, that sometimes not pointing out people's problems is the quickest way to get them to see them themselves. So,
Yeah. I recently went through a book, Never Split the Difference, written by a guy who was high up in the FBI and did FBI negotiations. And I need to go through it again. But it's, and I don't agree with a lot of, like, I don't agree with deception. And I think they will use deception in order to get what they want. But there are tools that they use that aren't deceptive. And so, for example, like mirroring, when someone says something, you can repeat what they said with a question mark, and they will then attempt to explain it themselves. And oftentimes, like, people just haven't thought things through. And just by mirroring, you can get them to arrive at a more reasonable, rational analysis of the situation. There's a lot of tools like that. So another one is, it seems. So I can say, you know, Michael, it seems like you're interested in woodworking, and you want to try to encourage people, you know, to do this kind of work. And it seems you think that there will be a benefit to doing so. So I don't have to actually take a position where I've just judged you, right? And it gives you the opportunity to respond. So there are tools we can learn in order to engage with people. I think using the video, where you can have tone, that's part of it. And then there's also ways of speaking. And when you study this stuff, you can begin to see how maybe people in this corner of the internet are using language in a way which, if they had used the words in a different way, it would have come off in a condemnation or a criticism. But you saying the same thing in a different way, it allows for the conversation to continue. We then can even learn by osmosis, right? We just by giving our attention to the process, the practice, we can pick up on these things as well. It's really important. Our world hasn't figured out how to do this, and is not teaching everyone how to do this.
yeah. You know, what was really interesting is how some of that stuff, like I think, you know, sometimes we do need the error correction. We need to figure stuff out, like we have real problems. But you know, there is value to community in and of itself. And so sometimes that means, like, you know, not making as much progress towards some specific goals so that you can strengthen and maintain relationships with people. And that might be, you know, more valuable. Because that was actually something I thought that was really interesting. I did listen to one of those streams that Nathan put out. I think it was the one that preceded his actually talking to John Vervaeke about PVK's mumbo jumbo or whatever. And he was saying how about, like, oh, they just want to get together and, like, have a good time. Like, why does that matter? Why do you have to meet in person? Like, that's not the most efficient way to find the truth or whatever. Like, it's not. And it's like, oh, okay, well, you're really revealing a lot of what's valuable to you, and, like, it's not people. So, I mean, but if you don't even know that is a legitimate and important thing to a lot of people, that kind of shows that you're disconnected from what's going on. So, because, I mean, honestly, the thing is with, like, whether meaning crisis or whatever, once you get a group of friends and you're busy spending time with them, you don't care about if the specific question is always answered, you know. So
yeah, I can have sympathy for Nathan in that regard. I've definitely become obsessed with things to the point where I exclude even my own wife and children, right? Where
Mm.
I should be giving more attention to them, but yeah, it's a balancing act. Your attention is valuable, and it's a question of where do you give it, and people are important. So, and it's easy to forget that sometimes, depending on your situation.
I think there's
Yep.
there's something about like the this mission that I'm on, or this thing that that I'm trying to correct, or whatever, right? That it's so important that I shouldn't look at that person across from me as a person, right? you know as maybe in some senses like a peer or a fellow human, right? Like I need to um, for the cause, I need to rule, to lord it over them, right? I think would be the New Testament term for it.
What occurred to me, I caught up on some Hitler recently. Um, I went and I started reading Mein Kampf, and it occurred to me that he valued truth more than it was at the top of his value hierarchy, right? So um, when he's got an idea of what is true and beautiful, and um, that can be very dangerous, right? So we have to be careful about our value hierarchy and what's in it, and it's have people. That is something that Paul I think has been stressing is like people are important and they are, um, you know, and it's something I've heard Jacob say, and I think probably Jacob likes to point out that Jesus said it is love God and love your neighbor, and so this kind of thing uh, is probably like the motivating force behind this corner. Is truth isn't as important as the relationships we have with other people, um, and for the religious people, God and neighbors are up there at the top. So I think it's a good point. If you don't
Well,
believe that, then if you don't believe that, then it's just you have a totally different worldview.
well, see, I don't know. I'm almost yeah. I don't know. Maybe I'm not gonna say this very well, but I think there is a way in which we can be about truth, right? And we can maybe even hold it in its highest place, but let that we don't let that we don't let it excuse us going about it in the wrong way, right? And like the person across from us isn't like, it's not about me winning them, right? um, and because I think sometimes like there's this idea of like, well, what's true is it's this end that I need to serve.
Well, you can
Man,
justify a lot of things when
yeah,
if you don't put love God and your neighbor, or just
right,
I would
right,
say
yeah,
even love your neighbor. If you put anything else there, you can justify all kinds of things. But I think instead of
yeah,
truth, I like to use honesty as a word. So like
yeah, yeah,
I'm not going to say I know the truth and or anything like that, but I can say things of like what I am trying to do and what I plan to do, and then I can have commitments, and then I can like be someone who honors the commitments because I'm an honest person. Like that seems more important to me than truth, because truth is hard to actually determine, but honesty, you can actually run tests on honesty.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah. Well, that's like, because that's to say, like even Nathan saying, like, I don't remember exactly what he said, but it seemed like it wasn't necessarily like truth was his goal, like epistemic certainty was his goal, which that's
yeah.
probably an unachievable goal. Like there's nothing you can there's nothing you can be certain to a degree that no one can cast any shadow of doubt on it whatsoever. But yeah, but you don't need to worry about that if you know the people around you are honest and they are telling you what they genuinely uh, mean and what they believe and the reasons why.
yeah.
Because that's like saying like nothing is certain, but we trust things because we have faith in them because of an overwhelming evidence.
Well,
Uh,
I want to do my mandatory, like if I'm going to pitch anything. So, you know, I shared a link. The you know, what is the most important thing we should be paying attention to? And I realize it's different for every person, but if I was going to share a link, this is the thing that's been on my mind. And so
Grow a
like
pair.
the what?
Grow a pair.
Not grow a pair.
Oh.
That's a work in progress. This one's the convective heat engine, and it's connected. What's interesting is it's connected to the Tower of Babel idea. But essentially, you know, there's an idea that we can provide clean water and energy to everyone on Earth if we can organize and put in the work. And when I share this idea with people, you know, everyone's interested in other things. And we wake up in the morning and check Twitter, and Twitter's not interested in it either, or Fox News, or whoever you pay attention to. And so, you know, I'll just take the opportunity to present this as something that you could be interested in, that, you know, actually can bring about good fruit. And we've talked to physicists about it who have not been able to disprove it. But yeah, that, you know, I shared it with Nathan, and Nathan's like, well, that looks cool. But then he's off to epistemic certainty, or whatever you want to call it. And like, for me, that loving God and loving your neighbor piece is important. And then what can we do to end up helping our neighbor? Like, Michael, you want to do some construction work? I like, if this thing works, I think it can be helpful, right? So I do like trying to connect things back into reality to some degree. And there, yeah, I'm even tempted sometimes that, like, I wonder, you know, are people serious when people say, it's like, I love God and my neighbor? Well, how serious are you? Right? And so to me, sharing a link like this is just, this was me being serious and going in. Karen Wong connected me with Jason Delport, Karen Wong with the Meaning Code. And I basically took his work and I put it on a website so that we could share a link with people. And, you know, maybe it's not going to work out, but the sooner we find out that it's not going to work, the better. So
what's the bottom line? How much money do we need to get to try it out?
To try it out, the bottom line.
Yeah.
I've heard Jason, I've asked the same question. It's a good question. There's different components. One part can provide water, another part can provide energy. If you were just doing the above ground part to provide water and building it like the smallest scale possible, which might be like very large, 300 meters tall, and would could provide water and housing for like a city of 30,000 people, right? This is huge. Like, the smallest you can do is you're going to be able to provide water, reliable supply of water for 30,000 people. You know, that's my understanding. And so you're talking about a mega project that is billions, right?
But so there's no
it's
way
like a nuclear reactor, basically.
Okay,
right?
so there's no way to create a smaller scale version just to test it.
Yeah, it's similar to, you know, doing nuclear energy, right? You can't build a small scale on some things, right? Or you couldn't whenever it was first being created.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, I just took my chance to put it out there. And yeah, I lost Bazzani whenever I shared it. No, I don't know. He probably had to disconnect, and I probably should too soon.
Yeah, I gotta go soon. We're gonna go have an appointment. My wife's having an ultrasound, so baby number 3 is on the way. So
that's exciting.
Yep.
Bazzani said my connection crapped out and can't get back in. All right. Well, I think this was a good live chatting. Do you have your link that you want to share?
I don't know. Just put my YouTube channel, but
yeah. So yeah, Michael has a YouTube channel, and I did watch his that he put out today, where he was reviewing Jacob's conversation with Stephen, who's a leader in some kind of leader in Eastern Orthodoxy, and you raised the question of, you know, exclusion, that being a topic that you were interested in, right? Who is excluded?
Yeah. Well, Jacob did agree that he thinks the Russians are funneling money into such things.
Well, yeah. I mean, it could happen.
Yeah.
And are the Russians the enemy? That would be the next question.
I don't know.
Yeah.
They're the enemy of somebody and something, but
Yeah. Somebody's enemy. All right, Michael, I'm going to let you
All
go.
right.
Enjoyed it. And
Good.
hopefully I'll catch one of these whenever you're hosting, but I'm just,
Yeah.
I want to get in at least one a week. So I've got my one for the weekend. I appreciate you being
Right on.
here.
Yeah,
And,
it's good to talk to you.
thank you to everyone who was here, and thank you, Bazani, for getting on as well. All right. Bye-bye.